got really about God's faith. It's not about Gomer. It's not about Hosea. It's not about Israel. They're just sub-characters in the story of God's tenacious, unrelenting love for them. And it's gut-wrenching, and it's beautiful, and it's tough, and it's wonderful, all wrapped into one. And so, we're not talking about this guy. My entire childhood was jump off the school bus and go inside and get a bowl of cereal and a pop with a handle, because I used to eat that much cereal. And I'd watch Gomer Pyle and Gilligan's Island every day, and then I'd go run outside and play until supper time. And, Gomer got his own show. He became a Marine head into the Gomer Pyle show. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about her. So, let me explain some things. I'm using the NIV today rather than my normal ESV, because the ESV language in the book of Hosea is extremely abrasive and very raw in describing her. So I've gone back to my old NIV that I used for 20 years, because it speaks of her as unfaithful rather than other language. And so I'm the father now. I have 4, but the one that sits in church last service is a 7-year-old. So I'm going to teach and preach like a father of a 7-year-old today. And I need all of you who are grown-ups to just really pay attention, because I'm going to try to speak in code in certain things so that we're family friendly here, okay? And so this is really awkward. So that's Gomer. And she's working. Trying to be me right now. Gomer is working. And we know it's Gomer from the book of Hosea, because she's made up of a hose. So this hose is Hosea. Here's our friend Gomer who's working. Okay. Good to get that over with. This is actually who we're talking about. Hosea 3:1. Hosea, go show your love to your wife again. Though she is loved by another and is an adulteress, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods. And so we're going to step into this beautiful story that may actually feel more like that for a lot of you. Because here's the deal. As we begin to walk into the text now in chapter 1, verse 1, part of me is compelled to warn those of you who are thinking about the temptation of stepping into an adulterous relationship or have done so. And the other is this explanation of grace and the fact that God can rebuild anything, and that maybe you crossed that bridge 10 years ago, but you feel like people still see you with the scarlet letter, and that you're branded forever. And so I have this tension of warning, pleading with you not to go there, and then on the other side say, but if you have, Christ is faithful to rebuild not just nations, but homes and your marriage in that. Because the unrelenting, tenacious love of Christ can rebuild anything. He can take anything broken and make it whole again. So, with that said, let's go to 1:1 and we'll start walking through the text. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, king of Israel. Now look up here. He lists 4 from Judah, which is where? North or south? South. And only 1 from the north. So if you remember, the kingdom blew up in 931 BC and became a divided kingdom, Israel in the north, Judah in the south, Yankees, Southerners. And he lists 4 of these guys, but only 1 of these. Why? Because a lot of those kings were considered illegitimate. They had not rightfully taken the throne. And so to preserve the integrity of the line of David, he mentions that in the reign of Israel, which is going to be taken next, it's 1 king. And we know because of the kings that he's given here that his ministry was like 750-ish to 715-ish. And so he's speaking primarily to the north, and he's pleading with them like everyone else to say, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And they don't listen. And in 715 in 22, while he's ministering, the Assyrians show up and in essence are like reporting for duty to carry out the sovereignty of God. We're the hands and feet of God and we're taking you away. They didn't say it that way, but that's what they were fulfilling. And they were living out for them. And so it says in verse 2 that the Lord begins to speak through Hosea, and the Lord said to him this: Go take to yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord. So a lot of times when we hear about prophets of Baal and Baal worship, we just kind of blow past it really quickly. But I think it's worthy of unpacking this for a moment because it'll give better understanding of what's happening. And they were agrarian, that's just who they were. They were people of the earth. And Baal worship was super common and God of fertility and of crops and very twisted sexually. Very odd, very perverted, very off course with so many things. And so much so that when Israel started mixing Baal worship into their own, someone could go to the temple and hire a worker. Okay? And in that would make this statement: May the goddess of Astarte or Asherah favor you, and may the god of Baal favor you. What? How could you do that? It's like somebody here going to find a worker out there and saying, before we step into that arrangement, may God bless and keep us. You get that? That's just weird. That's odd. God would never bless that, right? That's what's going on. His people are embracing Baal worship with all its sexual weirdness. And that's why prophet after prophet after prophet is pleading with them. So in this book, he'll mention their sin 150 times, and half of those were about idolatry. So not only are they breaking the commandment of having no other gods than idols, they are committing spiritual adultery with him as their father. And it's just twisted. And in verse 3 it says, so he marries Gomer, and she conceives, and she bore him a son. Now there's some debate about who the kids were. Like, were they his or were they somebody else's? But if you'll notice here in verse 3, it says she bore him a son. But with the second, third, it doesn't say him. So there's a lot of fair thought believes that this first child, this Jezreel, this first boy, was his, and the others were not. So these reading verses 7 and 8 there, gives us their names. Jezreel is the first, his name means scattered. Lo-Ruhamah is the next, not love. And Lo-Mahi is the last, not love. And there's powerful symbolism in those names, so much so that when we understand what her name means and what their name means, the beauty of the gospel comes into play. Gomer means in the sense of the fullness of wickedness. The fullness of just wicked. And then they have these children who have these names given to them. And yet, because God is so faithful in his covenant, he says in verse 10, right after that, he says this: Yet the Israelites will be like the sand of the seashore, which can't be measured or counted. And in the place where it was said to them that you're not my people, they will be called the sons of the living God. And so Paul will quote that in Romans. Peter will say in 1 Peter chapter 2, he'll quote that very truth. And what God is saying is, even though you were utterly faithless, I will always be faithful. I will honor the covenant that I made with you. I'll honor the covenant I made with Abraham, that all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. And we know that will be through Christ. We see this angst between a faithful God and an unfaithful people. And then it says in chapter 2, verse 5, look at it, 2:5. Their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. And she says, I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. Verse 6 begins 3 therefores. Therefore, I'll block her path with thorn bushes. Verse 9. Therefore, I'll take away my grain when it ripens and my new wine when it's ready. And verse 14, therefore, I'm now going to allure her, seduce her, woo her. I'll lead her to the desert to be tempted with her, and I'll give her back her vineyards. So the whole purpose of him drawing her is repentance. To give her that chance, to give her that opportunity to make things right. And then it says in verse 19, that I will betroth you to me forever, and I'll betroth you in righteousness, justice, and love and compassion. In chapter 3, which we'll get to in a moment, he's going to go buy her back. And I'll explain that when we get there. But she's gone far. One of the beautiful pictures of the Old Testament marriage is that thing called the bride price. When a young man gives something to the father for his daughter in marriage, the bride price. Stuff, barley, grain, animals, money, whatever. A price that was settled upon. Notice what it says the bride price is. Verse 19. It's righteousness and justice and love and compassion. We're going to celebrate and remember the Lord's table here in a moment. Give thanks for the body and blood of Christ. And when Christ in that moment was with his fellows in the context of the Passover meal, he is in essence saying to them, the bride price that I will pay for the church, the bride of Christ, will be my very life, which is demonstrated in things like righteousness and justice and steadfast love and mercy. So embedded in this ancient document that gets ignored all the time is this thought of Christ as Messiah giving himself for us as the bride of Christ. So when we get to chapter 3, verse 1, it says, so the Lord says, go show your love to your wife again. Though she's loved by another and is an adulteress, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites. Though they turn to other gods and have loved the sacred raisin cakes. Some type of weird thing going on with their sensual immorality, aphrodisiac, pagan stuff with the cakes. And he says, I want you to go get her and bring her back. Isn't that an argument? You know, like we all do in marriage, where you're really frustrated, intense fellowship. She's out having children with other men, breaking his heart, and God says, go get her and buy her back and bring her home. That is impossible in the flesh. There are a lot of other thoughts that go through the mind of a man or a woman, if that were reality. A lot of other thoughts, including hurting people physically. The possibility of the gospel so you this is the Old Testament way of saying, Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. How do you do that? God, he gave everything for her. The going price for a slave was 30 shekels. It says there in verse 4, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and also a homer and a lethek of barley. The thought here is that it may have bankrupted him. It may have given everything he had. In other words, I've only got 15 of this, but I'll give you some other stuff to kind of make up the difference. So it wasn't just a casual, we need $1. It was like empty your retirement account, maybe empty your checking account, whatever you got, to bring her home. That was the depth of what's happening. So they don't really know. We don't really know if she was working at the temple or if she was a concubine. She just was personally owned by someone as a slave. God's just going to make this very real for a moment. I want you to imagine your wife out there as your home. Or a wife, imagine your husband